Colin, what decisions are the Warriors facing this offseason?
Yeah, I think, there's really not a lot that they can do in terms of bringing in, new free agents from other teams or making trades. They just don't have a ton of flexibility. So I think, if you're looking at a trade that they can make, I think they're probably going to try to get rid of their first round pick. I know it's not a sexy trade. They have the number 28 pick in the draft. There's already been reports that they're trying to get rid of that. They have so much money that they're paying to not only their top three guys, Steph, Clay, and Draymond, but also some upcoming possible extensions and their own free agents they need to take care of, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But I think one simple move they can make, trying to get rid of that first round pick, they'll probably end up trading it for a future second or one of those fake future seconds that's top 60 protected or top 59 protected or whatever. But essentially their goal this offseason is to free up enough money to take care of their own guys.
Yeah, that's it. Colin's on it because he's around this team every single day. It's a money move. I think the pieces that they need in terms of who you might go out there and get in a trade are already in-house. Obviously, James Wiseman hasn't played a ton, but there's some confidence and some hope. He's going to be back. Moses Moody's a guy that people really like. And I'm partial to Jonathan Kuminga, who I think could be a great player, an outstanding player in this game, in this league in the years ahead. So I'm with Colin. This is a team that just won an NBA championship, that has a bunch of young guys they're optimistic about, that has their core that's obviously still in place, and most importantly, has Steph Curry doing Steph Curry things. As it relates to trades, and I know we're going to hit free agency, as it relates to the majority of this roster, they're in pretty good shape. It's about little minor calibrations and obviously not overhauls or major moves.
Yeah, and you heard Sherry talk about it in that piece about the fact that there's not a lot of high-profile free agents that are out there to fight for this offseason. But, Bill, if you're looking at free agents for the Warriors, I mean, who should they be targeting?
So the answer here is actually somebody that's internal, and I don't know. They can't afford. So the answer, I think, is Gary Payton II. I know he doesn't like being called the Mitten, but whatever you want to call GP2, that guy was a key contributor, and we saw him get some really important minutes down the stretch of that final game and the end of that series. The problem is, and to give the Warriors credit, this is true for a lot of guys. Otto Porter Jr. is another guy. GP2 has outplayed his contract, and that means that the Warriors recognize what he could be and were a part of bringing out the best in him. So is Gary Payton II going to be willing to take a big-time hometown discount because of the cap reality for the Warriors? I sort of doubt it, but that would be my priority, trying to make sure I can keep that guy because he fits perfectly into what the Warriors want to do and obviously what they just did.
Colin, you're already looking at Wiggins and Poole. Before we get your thoughts, here they are after last night's game.
And you about to get a bag. You about to get a bag. No. You about to get a bag. We about to get a bag. We about to get a bag. We all want to get a bag. Yeah.
Rings and bags, the big chats now. What do you make of that in the situation for Wiggins and Poole?
Yeah, so this is, Wiggins is going to be a free agent, not this summer, but next summer. But they're obviously already talking about extensions. I think Warriors owner Joe Lacob might have had a heart attack watching that clip during the celebration. He's probably hoping that Andrew Wiggins and Jordan Poole are going to be willing to take some sort of discount. But from that clip and from the way that they played in the postseason, they're going to want absolutely every penny that they can get. Look, the Warriors ownership is already paying a ton of money in luxury tax. They built the Chase Center as this kind of money factory, and it's starting to produce now that the Warriors are good again. So I don't think they'll be that hesitant to pay these guys what they're worth. You're hoping they could at least be around, where they are. Wiggins could take like $30 million. Poole could take $15 million a year, something like that. But even that might be a bit ambitious given the way that they played. But they need these guys. Both are up for extensions this summer. I think they're going to try to lock those up as early as possible to try to keep this team intact. Because as Bill mentioned, they're not only built to win now, but with these young guys, Wiggins is still younger than you think. Poole's 22 years old. All those rookies and young guys we're talking about, this team is also built up to contend in the future, but that requires locking up Andrew Wiggins and Jordan Poole this summer.
Boston Celtics, a lot of sentiment that this team will be back in the finals again very soon. Looking at their offseason, Colin, who's a free agent that they should be looking at?
Yeah, they're not going to have much room. A lot of these top teams just don't have the money to spend because they're putting so much into their top players. But they'll have the mid-level, they'll have minimum salaries. One guy I'm looking at, again, not a huge name, but a guy like TJ Warren, who, hasn't played over the last season plus because of injuries. last time he played, he was really, really good. A 20-point-a-game scorer who could knock down three-pointers at a high level. That's exactly what the Celtics need. They obviously need some sort of ball handler. It was clear they were turning the ball over like crazy. I don't know if that's going to be available. What is going to be available are these wing guys like TJ Warren, a 3 and potentially D guy if he gets into the Celtics system. I think he'll really, bolster what that team needs when one of Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum is on the bench. So, not a big name, but I think a guy like TJ Warren would really help them, and he might be able to be available at the right price.
See, Colin's answer is too good. I want to trade my answer for Colin's answer. I think that is the right answer. Otto Porter Jr. is a name that was given to me by a former GM that I talked to earlier today. And Colin's right. This is not an organization that has a lot of cap room and maneuverability, and they don't need to. Despite the heartache that they experienced yesterday, they are, Jeremy, you're right, going to be in a position certainly to make many deep runs in the postseason, and it won't be shocking if they get back to the finals a time or more in the years ahead. The MLE, the mid-level exception, is going to be where they're going to have to turn for whatever kind of small impact, maybe a little more depth on the wing at the forward position. Warren's a great addition. Otto Porter Jr., who they obviously got a very close look at over the last week and a half, is a guy who outplayed his contract in Golden State. So it just sort of depends where he wants to be and what the market dictates for him. But those are the kind of moves. And again, small calibrations, even though they're not NBA champions, they were obviously close for the Celtics team, not major moves. They're not able to, and they frankly don't need to.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that you kind of look at too. When you're that close, you just miss out. You kind of look at the deeper end of your roster to see kind of, hey, what are we missing here? So when you look at trade possibilities for the Celtics, I mean, they don't really have a lot of options here, do they, Bill?
No, they don't. I mean, they're handcuffed. I mean, the snarky answer, right, if you want to give the snarky hot take answers, trade Jason Tatum, he's not a closer. But the reality is Jason Tatum just got remarkable experience, and I think I'm bullish on what he can be in the future. The truth is, and I know we don't talk about human psychology as much in sports, a lot of it's numbers, but these guys, these human beings have to experience sometimes loss and defeat and heartache and these sorts of experiences to understand what it takes to play at this level of pressure against an opponent like Steph Curry and the Warriors. The Celtics are constructed and built the right way. And we saw since, January 22nd or whenever that turnaround began under Ime Udoka after his first year as a head coach with this team, that they are great. They're exceptional defensively. I still think have two superstars, whatever you want Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown to be called. Al Horford was a huge addition, and give that front office credit. They don't have the maneuverability or the room, and they frankly need not panic, shouldn't panic. They are constructed properly. They simply had a star in Jason Tatum, who wasn't able to play at the level he needed to this series. That's not easy to do. And they ran into a guy named Steph Curry, who's broken some hearts and some hopes and dreams of other teams before.
Yeah, Bill's right. The Celtics don't have a ton to trade. The hot take answer is to trade Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown. Look, that's not happening. These guys are young and have just coming within a couple games of winning the NBA Finals. You look up and down their roster, they just don't have a lot to trade. They do have a giant trade exception, but they're not going to be able to use it unless they get rid of Al Horford, which is clearly not happening. So as Bill said, this Celtics team is constructed well. Maybe they can add a little bit along the fringes, but in terms of trades, they just don't have a lot to offer in order to get someone back of importance.
And as they say, experience is the best teacher. NBA writers Colin Ward-Henninger and Bill Ryder discussing the end of the NBA season and what kind of summer lies ahead for the Warriors and the Celtics, the two finalists this season. In terms of the conversation, as we look at the odds heading towards next season, the Warriors already listed as the favorites at 5-1, but the Celtics are right there, right behind them at 6-1 alongside the Brooklyn Nets. And then you have the dethroned champions, the Milwaukee Bucks, at plus 750. Lakers, by the way, plus 2,200. To win the title. And then, of course, you get some other long shots. Orlando, Sacramento, Houston, Oklahoma City. Oof, 1,000-1. The Portland Trailblazers won 27 games last season, and the consensus is rebuild mode is underway. So as they enter a second season under Chauncey Billups, is now the time to move Damian Lillard. He's a valuable product. Could he be on the move, set to earn $42.5 million next season? If you take a look at Lillard's past two seasons, he averaged 24 points per game last season, shooting a field goal percentage at 40 and three-point percentage 32%. Still in the prime of his career. He's earned all NBA honors in 5 of the previous 6 seasons. He's going to be 32 when next season begins, but he also knows the clock is ticking in terms of his chances to be the best player on a championship team. So let's continue the offseason conversation with NBA writers Bill Ryder and Colin Ward-Henninger. Colin, what's the chance that Lillard gets traded this offseason?
I mean, you're putting me on the spot here, Jeremy. At this point, I think that the Damian Lillard trade talk has died down a little bit. So I'm going to say 10%. And the only reason I give it that 10 is that if they're unable to make moves that please Damian Lillard in terms of free agent signings, potential trades, to put enough around him to make him think that they can contend, at that point, I think Lillard might just ask out. But to me, that point isn't going to happen until at least into the season, a couple months. Then Lillard gets to see what his team looks like, how competitive they are in the Western Conference. Once they hit that point, if they look like they're still going to be floundering around the bottom of the league, at that point, I think Lillard might ask out. So for me, this offseason, I say 10%, but I think once we get into the season, that chances are going to be a little bit higher.
100% agree with Colin. Everything I've heard from everyone I've talked to around the NBA is there's very little to almost no expectation that Lillard will be traded in the summer, in the offseason. Now, there's some variables that are interesting. There's an ownership situation where there is certainly, talking to sources, some difference of opinion, the degree to which this ownership group, it's the same group, but it's new folks who are in charge. The former owner passed away a few years ago, are really committed and interested in paying attention. And if that's true, it means Joe Cronin, who's the new GM over the last year, has a lot of say, and he's just a new figure that folks aren't sure what he wants to do. Now, I'll be a little spicier than Colin. Colin, you went 10%, right? I'm going to go all the way up to 12% that Damian Lillard could be traded this offseason, because there are some other factors. If Lillard, as Colin just said, comes to the decision, and he hasn't yet, but decides, can't win here, these aren't the pieces, I'm about to turn 32 over the next few weeks, I got to be somewhere else. If that switch gets flipped, and it hasn't for him, he's been very loyal to Portland, things could accelerate. But I think Colin's right. We're in a holding pattern, and every person I've talked to, every source that I've run this by, thinks that Lillard will eventually play somewhere else, but that move, whenever it happens, is not imminent.
All right, so according to you guys, an 88 to 90% chance that Lillard is with Portland when they start next season. By the way, 7th pick in the upcoming NBA draft next week. Colin, okay, so let's say that you're a general manager who does want to add Lillard. Give us a trade proposal that you'd throw out there for him.
Yeah, let's remember that I said I only think there's going to be a 10% chance that this could happen. But if it does happen, I think a sneaky team that might be interested in Lillard is the Minnesota Timberwolves. And it looks like, they have a really good young core out there with Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards. You look at what D'Angelo Russell did for them in the playoffs, it wasn't great. He almost couldn't stay on the floor at times. So I think the Wolves might look into some sort of trade package to get Lillard, and they could send D'Angelo Russell out, who's an expiring contract and matching salary, along with Malik Beasley, who's kind of a, middling level player who can keep them afloat, and Jaden McDaniels, who's a really promising young defensive prospect. And then, of course, the draft picks. You're going to try to get those picks as far out as possible if you're Portland, because obviously if you're trading Lillard, this is a full rebuild situation. So let's go with the 2025 and 2027 first-round pick. That allows the Blazers to rebuild, clean the slate on salary. That allows the Minnesota Timberwolves to get an absolute superstar to put next to Towns and Edwards and really make a push in the Western Conference. So, the chances of this happening are probably pretty slim, but as I'm looking at it, I think it makes a lot of sense for both sides if it comes to this.
I love this idea. Maybe we can get Leonardo DiCaprio to inception this into Joe Cronin's mind. I'm not sure. I'm with Colin. I'm not sure it's going to happen, but to see it up on the screen is a beautiful thing. And the thing about it that I think is interesting and appealing, and this is going to have to be the key ingredient if any trade like this goes down, is that Lillard has to be sold on the notion whatever move he makes is going to benefit him in the short term. And as much as the Timberwolves have been teasing us for years, and they have, if you put Dame, who we know can close, who we know is a winner, on a team with Karl-Anthony Towns, you have to think, and it's an if they click, if it works, if the rest of that organization can get in the right direction, that would be a really fascinating combination and maybe a dangerous one.
Yeah, if you're tuning into AHQ right now and you just see the graphic go up, you're probably having a little bit of a freak out thinking that the trades actually happen, but it's just a proposal from our Colin Ward-Henninger. 90% chance, he says, that he's going to stay Will Lillard with the Trailblazers. Bill, let's talk about the Lakers. No draft picks, aging roster, new head coach. What's the latest on their attempts to trade Russell Westbrook?
Desperation, fear, sadness, and self-loathing is probably the best way, Jeremy, to summarize it. So I talked to a league source yesterday, very familiar with the Lakers thinking and what they're trying to do, and with a Western Conference front office source today. And they both gave me the same answer that I have heard every single time I have asked someone about this over the last month, which is often, and I can hear sources rolling their eyes on the phone when I ask, which is there's nowhere to move Russell Westbrook. There's just not. The very likely outcome, and you never know, maybe Rob Pelinka can pull some kind of miracle. Crazier things have happened. But the expected outcome is that Westbrook is going to obviously opt into that deal that's almost worth $50 million this year, that the Lakers and really Darvin Ham are going to have to figure out how to make it work, and it probably won't. It's probably going to be a struggle this year. And then a year from now, when that deal is done for Westbrook, the Lakers can have some flexibility, and there'll be all kinds of things they have to figure out what they can do, including LeBron James. But in terms of answering your question, Jeremy, they are the Lakers desperate to move on from Westbrook, and that is a terrible contract for a player who has very little value. I have not talked to a current GM, a former GM, or a person who works in a front office anywhere in the country. And I've talked to a lot of people the last month who believe that there's anyone out there who want to take Russell Westbrook and help the Lakers to try and get him off the books.
Okay, so Colin, because you were so good with the Damian Lillard proposal, put together a trade proposal for Westbrook that would make sense.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't anything new. This is the trade proposal that's been out there for ever since it didn't work out for Russell Westbrook with the Lakers. And the only thing that makes it, as Bill said, if the Lakers could have traded Russell Westbrook and gotten something back in return that they liked, they would have done it by now. But the trade that makes the most sense is just to trade him for John Wall to the Rockets. John Wall's been sitting on the bench, doing absolutely nothing, working out with the team, but not being allowed to play in games. They make the exact same salary. The sticking point is that the Rockets would want some sort of compensation. They're perfectly happy letting John Wall sit on the bench. There's not much they're going to do with Russell Westbrook. They might just put him on the bench too. So they're going to need some sweeteners, and that'll be that 2027 first that the Lakers really don't want to get rid of, and has kind of been the sticking point in any Russell Westbrook trade. So, I'd love to say, for Lakers fans, that there's something out there that they could get. There's been some talk about Malcolm Brogdon and Buddy Hield. Look, they're not getting anyone of substance for Russell Westbrook. Bill mentioned his trade value is absolutely nothing. It's completely negative. So the only thing they can do is swap him for another distressed asset in John Wall. I just don't know if the Lakers are going to be willing to part with that first-round pick.
All right, I'm not from LA. I'm not a Lakers fan. Colin and I are reporters, not fans. But I live in Los Angeles now, and I'm surrounded by Lakers fans, and my son is a Lakers fan. What are you going to do? It's where we're raising him. So let me just channel all Lakers fans when I say, on their behalf, for the love of all that is holy and good in the universe, Rob Pelinka, do not do this. Colin's right. Like, that 2007 first-round pick is the piece that needs to be added in whatever scenario you want to put out there. But there's a reason John Wall's not playing. There's a reason no one is banging down the door to try and get John Wall. Because it might just be the same thing as Russell Westbrook, which is to say a high-usage rate guy who's over the hill and can't contribute, who's going to be problematic in his fit with the Lakers, but you'd also lose a first-round pick. The fact is that sometimes in gambling and in life, you can't throw good money after bad. They made a mistake with Russell Westbrook. That ship has sailed. That's over. They are probably stuck with him, and you don't move on from Russell Westbrook this year just because you feel the desperation over the next 12 months. If you can't get back something that allows you to be competitive in 2022-23, you just have to accept the fact you screwed up and you have to wait a year.
Yes, plus 2,200, the Lakers' odds to win the NBA championship going into next season. Okay, the Phoenix Suns up near the top of the odds list at plus 800, 8-1. The Suns don't want to trade Donovan Mitchell, but he might be interested in a move elsewhere. The Knicks, the Heat, the Hawks said to be possible destinations. Bill, what are the chances that Mitchell requests a move and gets moved?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting situation. Obviously, the Utah Jazz have a new head coach, and Danny Ainge isn't new as the head of basketball operations, but he's done what a lot of bosses do. He got his footing, and now he's starting to put his foot down. I'll give it like a 55% kind of like somewhere in that range. Everything that I've heard from people out there is that Donovan Mitchell would like to be traded. He would like to be somewhere else. He's interested in the notion of going to another place. The problem becomes, I think this is also true in a place like Portland, unless you're going to rebuild, you do not have an opportunity to trade Donovan Mitchell and have any kind of short-term success. Let's just be honest, guys. Giannis notwithstanding, there are certain markets in the NBA where it's really hard to win if you don't draft and retain superstars. Those markets include places like San Antonio, they're places like Portland, they're places like Sacramento, and they're obviously places like Utah. I love Salt Lake City. It's not a shot. It's just a reality. It's hard to recruit guys there. Donovan Mitchell, whatever you think his shortcomings are or aren't, is an exceptional player, especially for that market. So there's going to be a give and pull here between what Donovan Mitchell wants. We don't really have insight into Danny Ainge. We know that he has the confidence, some sources would say ego, to believe he can rebuild anywhere. Other people point out it's different trying to build a winner in Boston than it is in Utah. I think it's around a coin flip, but it's going to come down to whether Mitchell pushes really hard and I don't know the answer to this, what Ainge actually wants to do as it relates to that asset/valuable player. And I don't think we know that yet.
Yeah, Bill's much more connected than I am, so I'm kind of regretting my answer at this point, but I gave it 1%. I don't think Mitchell's going anywhere, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One, I think that the Jazz value him more than other teams do. This is a guy who's obviously been a tremendous player, all NBA level talent, but does have defensive issues. There are questions about how his usage rate, the way that he scores in playoff games and whether it's effective. He puts up big numbers, but is it conducive to winning? I think the Jazz value him a lot more than other teams do. And the second reason is if the Jazz are going to make a move, I think Rudy Gobert is the one to go. Right? We just watched the playoffs where who are the best players? Steph Curry, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. It's all about perimeter players. It's all about wings, guys who can create their own offense. It's not about big centers. So if the Jazz are going to make a move, which it is very likely that they will after their disappointments in the last few seasons, I think that Gobert would be the one to move and that they would continue to build around Mitchell because he's still very young and obviously very talented.
So you're 2% apart when it comes to the Lillard deal, 54% apart when it comes to the deal for Mitchell. All right, they are NBA writers Colin Ward-Henninger and Bill Ryder getting into the NBA offseason for us. We still have plenty more to go with them. We're turning the page before the Warriors even get a parade in. As we take a look at the notable off-season dates. The NBA draft, of course, the next focus coming up on June 23rd. Then free agency. Certainly hear a lot about that. Comes up on July 1st before the Summer League starts in the 7th.
Big threes of all time here. He's going with the Durant Golden State era from 2016 to 2019, followed up by the Celtics, Big Three from 2007, and then the Heat from 2010 to 2014. Let's welcome back Bill and Colin here. We're going to talk about potential big threes. But Bill, I want to start with you because you said, look, you don't really need a big three. You just kind of need the two right guys together.
Yeah, I think it's a big two. Am I allowed to just like give Colin a little bit of a hard time that he didn't put the Miami Heat team that I covered? What did Pete Prisco help you with this list? You gotta put the Miami. I'm just kidding, Pete. I love you. You gotta put the Miami Heat at number 2. They got 2 champions. All right. The truth is, I covered that Heat team, so I'm super biased. There's no doubt. It's probably the right list. Yeah, I do think we've gotten to a point where big twos, and it's interesting, I'd be curious Colin's view on this. I don't know how you characterize Klay Thompson and Draymond Green, at least in this last run. It's almost like Curry was the big one, and those two guys maybe added up together to the second part of the big two. So I think if you can get 3 guys, and I don't think, for me, the Milwaukee Bucks don't have a big 3, with all respect to Drew Holiday, even Chris Middleton. It feels like a superstar model, and then you have some depth and another star or co-star as a part of that. But if you can go out there and get a big 3, it's obviously going to be really helpful. I just think the way the cap works and the fact that the CBA is starting to actually have the impact it was supposed to. Durant kind of obscured when he went to the Warriors how this was supposed to work. I just think it's a harder thing to pull off now.
Okay, a super team model. So that's what we've asked you guys to create, a couple teams in situations where we could see a new superstar team or a big 3. Colin, we're to start with you. You're trying to get the Lakers some help, and you like Kyrie to head there.
Hey, look, as Bill said, it's very hard to make super teams these days, so this might be kind of a pipe dream for Lakers fans. But look, obviously Brooklyn has had a hard time with Kyrie over this last couple of seasons, actually. And obviously the Lakers have had a hard time with Russell Westbrook. So there is some chatter. I don't know how much validity there is to it, that there could be a swap of those two, require a sign and trade of Kyrie either opting in or signing a new contract with Brooklyn, then being traded to the Lakers. That would create a Kyrie Irving, LeBron James, Anthony Davis big 3. And, Kyrie Irving has his issues, but that's pretty enticing in terms of being able to compete for a championship. when Kyrie Irving is on the floor, which, has been increasingly infrequent over the last couple of years, when he's on the floor, he's a very good player, and we know how much he compliments LeBron James because of their days in Cleveland. Anthony Davis would be a perfect addition to those two. So I don't know how likely it is, but if we're talking about potential super team, something that could actually happen and make an impact in the NBA, Kyrie Irving going to the Lakers to join LeBron James and Anthony Davis would make a huge splash.
Let's go to biased Bill here when it comes to the Heat. I'm just kidding, Bill. But you do look, so much about this Heat team is like, look, they've got so many of the pieces there, and this team feels like a Heat culture. So who could you add to take them to that next level?
Yeah, I actually think Collins is more realistic than mine for a lot of reasons. But I would, if we're trying to conjure up some way to put a big three together, I'm a big believer in Jimmy Butler, especially in the postseason. We know what Bam is. Zach LaVine as the missing piece would be really interesting. Now, the reason that's difficult, well, there's several. One is that just talking to folks around the NBA, there's not a lot of confidence that if LaVine decides he wants to leave this summer, that the Chicago Bulls are going to be helpful in facilitating a two-way trade, right? They're going to be a part of a sign and trade deal, especially with the Miami Heat. There's a little bit of history there. But I do think that the Heat have some younger guys that could be of some value and of some interest to a team like the Bulls. And we know that Pat Riley teams don't tend to value the draft as much as other front offices do. So if LaVine decides that he wants to go somewhere else and he wants to go to Miami, and the Bulls change the course that as I understand it, they're on now, and they're willing to help facilitate that with a sign and trade and give LaVine that extra year to get some pieces in return, I think that would be a fascinating team. And I'll just end here. Pat Riley loves stars. He loves big game hunting. Nobody thought that other big three team with LeBron and Bosh and Wade was going to happen until it did. So I just think it's an interesting place to keep an eye on when we talk about trying to put together a triumvirate of this level of basketball excellence.
I will admit that Miami is a lot cooler than Dallas, even though I am from Dallas. But Colin, you have another option for Zach LaVine, and Dallas is cool when you have Luka Doncic.
Yeah, I've been in love with Zach LaVine and Luka Doncic pairing up. It's a pipe dream of mine. I don't know how realistic it is. As Bill said, there is some talk that LaVine will go back to Chicago. But I think this would just be a perfect pairing. That's a super team in itself with Luka Doncic and Zach LaVine. LaVine's off-ball shooting and creation abilities is exactly what you need next to Luka Doncic. And then if you want to talk about a big three, they just traded for Christian Wood. And I know most of the mainstream NBA audience probably hasn't seen a lot of this guy because of the bad teams he's been on. But this is a 6'10 guy who can block shots. He can step out and knock down a three. Something to be desired on the defensive end. But you think getting in there with Jason Kidd, he'll help fix him there. So if he could give you, maybe 75, 80% of what Chris Bosh was to the Miami Heat back with the Bills' favorite team, the Heatles, I think that would be a really interesting, big two with maybe a half on the way to being a big three. So Zach LaVine going to Dallas to join up with Luka Doncic, that would be an incredible development this offseason.
Look, the one thing we can all agree. Go ahead, Bill.
No, yeah. I was saying, like everyone else, I'm also smitten with the idea of Luka Doncic. I'm all about these big 2.5s in Dallas.
Okay, so give Luka some help because you also have an idea of how to do. I mean, the number one thing is the Mavs. It became very clear Luka can't do everything. So how would you make this Mavs team just a little bit better?
All right, so here's the asterisk that I think this is unlikely. In fact, I know for a fact talking to people that Collins is more likely, and that's also not likely. And most people I talk to think LaVine's going to remain a Bull, and I think Bradley Beal's going to stay in Washington. But I'm gonna swap out Zach LaVine for Bradley Beal. If something changes, as I understand Bradley Beal's thinking, or at least the thinking that people around him and around the league think that he's going through right now, if he decides not to stay in Washington, there's no better place, I think, than Dallas. For Amanda, the reason you just hit on and that Colin just talked about. Luka Doncic, Luka Doncic, Luka Doncic, Luka Doncic, the first 5 reasons. And Wood is a really interesting player in Dallas. And he would be, I think, a really impressive, if underrated by the casual fan, piece as the third part of a team that can make a push. So if it's not Zach LaVine and you can get Bradley Beal to decide he wants to leave Washington, D.C., which, again, few people that I've talked to think that's realistic, I would love to see Beal and Luka pair up with the Mavs and make that team really dangerous for a long time.
Well, like you said, like you guys said, some of these seem like pipe dreams. But if we've learned anything over the past couple of years, pretty much anything is possible there. All right, guys, hang on just a second. Taking a look at the top NBA free agents this offseason that we have. Who could be moving? James Harden with his new team there, the 76ers. You heard Bill say it seems like Zach LaVine will stay with Chicago, but we'll wait and see. There, LeBron has only missed the postseason 4 times in his career, 2 of them now with the Lakers. And after this past season, he vowed to never miss again. Let's welcome back Bill and Colin here. So we have one burning question for both of you regarding the Lakers, and then we have some other teams where you guys are coming up with your own questions. So here's the question. Colin, we'll start with you. Is this the final year for LeBron and the Lakers?
To me, no. The answer is no. I think LeBron wants to finish his career in Los Angeles. You know, we've talked about this a lot, but he has a home there. He's watching his kids grow up there. The only question is, what are the Lakers going to do around him to put a winning product on the floor? Like you said, he doesn't want to miss the playoffs again. So this is going to require a lot of, roster construction, a lot of kind of therapy with Russell Westbrook to figure out how we can help if they can't trade him. I think that's part of the reason why LeBron hasn't exactly committed to the Lakers beyond this season, saying, or beyond his contract, saying that I'm going to be here forever. I think he likes to put pressure on the front office to make sure that they make the necessary moves to make the Lakers competitive. I think after all that's taken care of, I believe he'll probably, in my opinion, sign an extension with the Lakers. This is a guy who knows the end of his career is coming. The injuries have become more frequent. He's still playing at a tremendous level, but I think he's always been one to take care of the money, maximize his value. And then if down the road he decides he wants a trade, he can always demand one. So I think he'll finish his career in LA, but with the caveat that the Lakers do make enough moves that satisfy him in terms of putting a competitor on the floor.
Yeah, I'm with Colin, and I'll just add to this. This is a guy who has always honored his contract, right? Never forced his way out, but he's gone wherever the hell he's wanted to, whatever the reaction's been after that. And so he's going to have to see his way through a difficult season with Russell Westbrook. And I think just talking to some folks around LeBron James, I get the sense that they understand that. They like to pretend everything's going to be fine. LeBron's LeBron. They're going to figure it out. But I think LeBron is almost certainly understanding that this next season may not go the way that he wants it to. The good news for the Lakers is it's not as if Russell Westbrook's under contract for 2 or 3 years. It's a single season. That's going to create a lot of flexibility in a year. And Colin just said it. LeBron is going to utilize leverage. He's going to create leverage. And remember, this is a Lakers organization that has always been a player-first organization going back to Dr. Buss. Before player empowerment was a thing, the Lakers made it a part of their motto and a part of their culture. Remember, they gave Kobe Bryant a ridiculous deal in terms of the value for the Lakers at the end of his career. Those last 2 years, the Lakers weren't very good, but they thought it was the right thing to do. So I don't even know if LeBron has to pull those levers to get the quote-unquote leverage that he wants. He's going to have a ton of say in a year. They're going to have the ability to go out and make some moves. LeBron James, as Colin said, loves Los Angeles, California. He wants to be there. And my best guess, and talking to folks around the Lakers a lot and around LeBron sometimes, is that, yes, LeBron probably leaves someday because he said this. He wants to play with Bronny Jr. whenever that time comes. But I think, guys, for the foreseeable future, he's going to be a Los Angeles Laker. And I actually think as bad as this season is likely to be for LA, as pessimistic as I think Lakers fans should be, a year from now, if LeBron is still playing at a high level, I think it becomes a pretty interesting team again.
In a year, just be patient for a year there. Let's go to the Heat. We're going through some of the top teams in the NBA. Biggest question you guys have for the Heat, Bill, we'll start with you.
We talked on this a little bit earlier in the show. Easier said than done. It was clear to me, and I think clear to most folks in the NBA, and probably clear to the Miami Heat, they just don't have enough offensive firepower to compete in an Eastern Conference at the level that they want against some of the teams that are out there. And you have to presume that Chris Middleton, we hope, will be healthy for a playoff run next year. I don't believe the Nets are going to be any more dangerous next season, but that's certainly not a universal view. They could be. The Boston Celtics, who just made the finals, may take a step forward. You just go through the East. It is not an easy place to compete. They need another offensive superstar. Now, Zach LaVine, Bradley Beal are guys we've talked about. They're technically able to move. The expectation from sources is that they won't. I know Joel Embiid was flirting with the Heat a little bit, or that was the perception on Twitter when he was tweeting them a little bit and about them, but just talking to Heat sources, again, I could hear them rolling their eyes when I asked them if they might make a move for Embiid. But Pat Riley can be a surprise, and he's not going after Embiid. That's not happening. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Heat, if they can find something, try to go get a little more extra offensive firepower. Tobias Harris is a guy that reportedly is available, and I haven't checked with Heat sources on whether or not that's a name that they're targeting, but some kind of offensive star or something approximating that is what the Heat need.
Yeah, and my move for the Heat, my question for them, it kind of ties in with what Bill's saying, is can you trade Duncan Robinson? And if they do end up getting a star, they have to do some sort of sign and trade or just an outright trade. Duncan Robinson's salary is probably going to be included in that. This is a player who's going to be attractive to other teams. He's an incredible three-point shooter. Obviously, last year and last postseason didn't work out for him, but that doesn't mean that all of a sudden he can't shoot. The Heat just have a replacement for him in Max Strus, who's much cheaper. So I think obviously they're going to be looking to move him, and whether it's for a superstar or whether it's just kind of unloading him on one of these teams like the Thunder or the Rockets or one of these non-competitive teams to try to get off that salary, because they're going to have to pay Tyler Hero this summer and extend him. And like Jordan Poole and Andrew Wiggins, he wants to get the bag. So they're going to need to free up as much money as possible. And Duncan Robinson has kind of fallen out of the rotation, fallen out of favor in Miami. So I think that's an important piece to move in order for this team to go forward.
Let's stay in the East. Let's go to the Nets here, who, by the way, when it comes to betting, still have the second best odds behind Golden State to win the title next year. I feel like there are so many questions when it comes to this Nets team. Colin, what's your biggest one, though?
Yeah, I think it's the biggest question we've had for a long time. What are they going to do about Ben Simmons? How are they going to handle him? He had back surgery. When do you call him back and say, hey, look, we need you to come in and work out? If he's working out and says, it's still not right, well past the timetable when he should be back, what do you do? This is just such a confusing, kind of unprecedented situation where we don't know if this guy, Ben Simmons, as talented as he is, actually wants to play basketball. So to me, obviously there's Kyrie stuff going on with the Nets, but to me, Ben Simmons is really the key to taking this team to the next level because of his defensive ability, because of his ability to push the ball in transition. But first, you need to make sure that he is mentally prepared to play and physically prepared to play after having not played for so long. So this is a very, very difficult situation for the Nets, and that's my biggest question heading into this offseason.
I don't know if we have any Stranger Things fans here on the show, but I am a fan. I can tell you this. The Brooklyn Nets are the upside down. They should be great. It should be wonderful. They should win, and everything is backwards. Bizarro is the exact right word, and I'm not sure anybody encapsulates that better than Kyrie Irving. And it is an upside-down choice and decision that Brooklyn has. Because on the one hand, they don't really have a lot of options in terms of their cap space with Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving can opt into his deal in, a week and a half at $36.5 million is what it is. He wants a whole bunch of money. As Colin said, he wants to get that bag. And what I'm hearing, and there's reports out there about this, is that there might be a movement and there might be some compromise toward a shorter-term deal. Something we might see with some of the guys out there who have a lot of upside talent-wise. I think James Harden is another example of this, but who haven't been able for a variety of reasons to be consistent or reliable. Obviously, Kyrie has not been reliable, hasn't played some games. You heard the GM of that organization at their exit interviews with the media say, in effect, we need people who want to be here. So a shorter-term deal for Kyrie Irving, how they handle that, what they pay him, what the compromise is, I think is going to be really critical. We think Kyrie wants to be a Brooklyn Net and stay with his buddy Kevin Durant. We think the Brooklyn Nets want to pay Kyrie, but not for the entirety of a max deal. But again, everything in Brooklyn is upside down. Nothing makes sense. It really was a horror story for an organization that thought they were going to be great. And when it comes to Kyrie Irving, it is dangerous territory to ever try and guess what in the world he is thinking or going to be thinking when the decision time comes.
I do not know anything about the Stranger Things, but someone else where it's hard to try to predict what they want to do would be James Harden. Let's go to the 76ers here. Colin, what's your biggest question for the 76ers?
Yeah, for me, I'm going to put James Harden aside for the second. And what are they going to do on the wing? How are they going to get help on the wing? This is a team that was playing Matisse Thybulle in the playoffs, and he could barely even stay on the court despite his defensive prowess. Other than that, you have Danny Green, who's obviously just been injured. What are they going to do to get three-point shooting and defense on the wing? I don't care whether you have James Harden, Joel Embiid, Tobias Harris. This is a league of wings, and if you can't have three-point spacing, and if you can't have defensive players who can lock down the other team's best perimeter players, you're not going anywhere. You're not going to win a title. So to me, there are questions about the stars, obviously, but I think what they need to do around the fringes, what type of players can they get with the financial restrictions that they have because of all the money they're paying their stars? To me, it's what are they going to do on the wing, and how are they going to get effective players to fill in those positions?
Yeah, I mean, Daryl Morey has his hands full. The gentleman who now runs basketball operations, the basically super GM. He's got a bigger title than that. And that's a huge part of it. Keeping Joel Embiid is really important, and James Harden. And it's not just a basketball problem, though it is a basketball problem. It's also a political problem because Daryl Morey came in. Obviously, he was the GM in Houston when James Harden was there. They had a lot of success together. He trades away Ben Simmons and a lot of other important pieces to get James Harden. And by the way, Colin hit on this earlier in the show. It is a mercy for Daryl Morey that Ben Simmons has not played basketball yet, or that trade would look even more atrocious. James Harden has looked old. He has looked slow. He has looked out of shape, and he has often looked ineffective. Now, we know he can play at a high level. He did at times for the Nets this past season before demanding a trade, but I know there's not a lot of comfort in that front office, even with Daryl Morey's commitment to and need to get something back from James Harden to give him a 5-year max deal that will pay him an absurd amount of money when he's 36, 37 years old. So I think a huge part of a very busy offseason for that organization is finding some sort of deal with James Harden. Again, like Kyrie Irving, maybe it's a shorter deal that includes the opt-in and the massive amount of money that's going to include, but a little bit less on the back end, a 3-year deal, a 4-year deal. But Daryl Morey's ability to compromise with James Harden, who he's bet a lot of his own political capital on within that organization, with that owner, is going to be a critical part of Philadelphia's offseason.
All right, let's hop over to the West. Let's talk about the Suns. Look, if it was the end of the regular season, we're like, the Suns, they're gonna do it. Chris Paul's finally gonna get his ring. 37 years old now. Bill, what's your biggest question for the Suns?
So there's a lot, and I'm sure DeAndre Ayton. There's a lot of things you can look at. We have such recency bias, and it's really easy when something happens to be like, that's the biggest thing in the world. And look at me, I'm the guy saying that who thinks Steph's a top 5 all-time player, though I do, and I have for a long time. The Suns were in the finals a year ago. And they did not accomplish what they wanted this year, but they have a really good young core. For me, I think a really important question of what they do or don't do, and they'll have to know this internally, is whether or not the Chris Paul we saw for most of the year is the guy they're going to have next season. Dynamic, one of the great point guards in the history of the game, a winner. It's a perfect fit, really, for him in Phoenix. Or the Chris Paul we saw toward the end of the playoffs. He looked exhausted. He looked worn out. I understand we've had some condensed NBA seasons, and sources I've talked to think that's been a contributing factor for a lot of guys who have hit walls, especially guys like Chris Paul who's older. But CP3, where he's at, whether he's at his limit, whether or not he's hit that age where it's just diminishing returns from here on in, is going to be a really important thing for the Suns to understand and to adjust around. Or if not, if he's who he was the first part of the year, to not adjust around, I think is really important for what the Suns do.
Yeah, and for me, it kind of ties into that. As Chris Paul ages, as he becomes less effective, as he needs more rest days, more load management, you're going to need another guy, and that guy might be DeAndre Ayton. Obviously, they've had kind of some friction in that relationship with the Suns not extending him. DeAndre Ayton, his people have said that he was kind of hurt by that. But ultimately, if they decide that they want to pay DeAndre Ayton, they can bring him back because he's a restricted free agent. So my question is, if he gets a max offer from another team, are the Suns going to be willing to match that? There's teams like Portland, maybe Indiana, other teams with cap space that can throw a max contract at Ayton. And are the Suns willing to pay that? They weren't willing to pay it for his extension. Are they going to be willing to pay it now? And as I said, it ties into Bill's question. If Chris Paul is not able to perform at the level that we've seen over the last few seasons, Ayton becomes so much more important because now he becomes that second guy, gets a few more post touches, a few more pick and rolls with Devin Booker, things like that. So I'm very curious to see how the Suns handle a center in the modern NBA, which, as we know, isn't the most high leverage position. But for the Suns specifically, it seems like Ayton is an important piece. And will they be willing to pay up for him if it comes to that?
All right, finally to the team that beat the Suns in the postseason, the Dallas Mavericks there. We've talked about getting help for Luka. But Colin, what is your biggest question when it comes to the Mavericks this offseason?
Yeah, it's similar to the Suns with Ayton, and it's how much is too much for Jalen Brunson. Obviously, we've seen what this guy's capable of if the Mavericks are unable to get a superstar to put next to Luka Doncic. Jalen Brunson has proven that he is more than capable of playing that role. And also when Luka was out in the playoffs, he stepped up and was an absolute scoring machine. So this is a guy who's very important to this team. But again, if he gets a gigantic offer and you're locked in for 5 years with this guy, is he the one who's going to take you to the next level and get you past the Western Conference Finals into the NBA Finals? That's a question that Mark Cuban, the entire front office, and the rest of this Mavericks organization have to ask themselves. If the price tag gets too high, are they going to be willing to pay that to Jalen Brunson?
Yeah, and I'm going to just piggyback on what Colin said. You have to get, I know we discussed this earlier, you have to get Luka Doncic a co-star. If you get a co-star with him in that organization, they're good enough to win an NBA championship. There's other factors, I understand that, but they'll have the talent. For me, I don't think Jalen Brunson is that guy. And talking to some folks around the NBA, there is other skepticism whether or not he can be that guy, the second best player on a championship team. So Colin's right. They have to figure out Brunson, and at least for my money, I think they have to figure out a solution that is not Jalen Brunson. His market value is going to be much higher than I think his actual worth. This is what happens when teams are desperate to go and get somebody, anybody. If I'm the Mavericks, you don't have to gamble on Jalen Brunson. You don't have to be desperate. You have a long-term plan with Luka Doncic. We talked about Zach LaVine. We talked about Bradley Beal. I know they're unlikelihoods, but that's the level of target if I'm the Dallas Mavericks I'm going after.
Guys, thanks so much. Regardless, it's going to be a very interesting offseason when it comes to the NBA. Colin and Bill, enjoy your weekend. We'll talk to you soon. Taking a look at upcoming notable NBA dates. Of course, it all begins with the draft next Thursday. Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis. No yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.